I want to bring into the conversation Yves Sintomer. He is a professor of political science at the University of Paris, Vincent Saint-Denis. Thanks so much for being with us here on France 24. So another national strike has been called for Thursday. Garbage, as you can tell, has been piling up. Here in the French capital, there are more calls for labor action on the horizon. Did Macron's comments here this afternoon do anything to calm the tensions?
No, probably not. I mean, the president wants to shift the discussion, the conversation to other issues. But the main issue now is the reform of the pension system. And on this, it just say, we go on. And the further question is it possible to govern a country, a complex country like France, against the unions, against the majority of the people, against the millions of people who demonstrate in the streets, against those who strike, and against the majority of the parliament. So, I mean, we live really in a democratic crisis, and one can have the feeling that the president doesn't listen to this.
Well, Emmanuel Macron's approval rating has dipped to 28%, as we mentioned there at the top. That, along with the fact that he has a minority government, what does that say about his ability to govern in the coming 4 years?
This is a big question. I mean, it's not possible to use 49.3 article for any law, any bill. It's only possible for financial bills on the one hand, and once a year, basically, for other bills. What will happen? It will be very difficult after rising such an opposition on a very important issue to find compromises and allies to pass other bills.
So, of course, Macron really wants to turn the page here. Given what we're seeing in the streets, do you think that's something that's possible? Can he turn the page?
It will be very difficult. I mean, nobody can say what will happen in the streets, but one can predict that a lot of people are really obsessed, angry. I mean, at the time being, hundreds of people, very often young people, are arrested in the street and then released after a couple of hours without being convicted. It's not a good dynamic for democracy. It's not a good dynamic for a country.
Mark Perlman, we were talking a little earlier. Macron said as the chief executive, it's his job to hear the anger of the people. He hears the anger. Do you think the people in the streets feel heard?
Probably not.
No.
Probably not. No. Someone who already reacted, and I was mentioning earlier, is the head of one of the main unions, the CFDT. Laurent Berger immediately tweeted after Emmanuel Macron said in the interview that no unions, and he cited Laurent Berger, the leader of the CFDT, propose anything on the unions. Laurent Berger just tweeted, denial and lie, the CFDT has a project to reform the pension system. Macron knew it, but he lied just to show that he's unable to reform. So that's not a very good omen if you have one of the main union leaders immediately reacting to the interview and just before a day of strike and demonstration. He is one of the so-called moderate union leaders. And so obviously Emmanuel Macron was aiming at him when he said the unions had not proposed any compromise. But it shows you, to answer your question, that there's no dialogue with the unions right now. And the unions have never been united in the way they've been for the past decade. Even during his first mandate, Emmanuel Macron tried to reform the pension system. It was a different system, and he had the CFDT on board. This time, they're against him, and clearly the interview today will not help soothe the anger of the unions. So when Emmanuel Macron says, I want to sit down with the unions, we want to sit down with you in the coming weeks to talk about jobs, to talk about earnings for those who work late or have hard labor and so on, it's unlikely that they will tell him, sure, Mr. President, let's meet tomorrow at the Élysée Palace whenever you want, because the thing you don't want to talk about with us is the pension reform and pushing the age from 62 to 64. This is a no-go for us. Well, so we won't discuss this. And so that's how why there's a problem. You have a breakdown of social democracy, as it's known here in France. And you also have nearly a breakdown of parliamentary democracy, because the government was forced to use the Article 49.3. Yes, it's legal. Yes, it's constitutional. But yes, it's a last order measure. I mean, this is the thing you do when you don't have a majority. And he's supposed to have a majority. He was reelected. He has a relative majority. He was hoping to get the Conservatives to side with him, making concession after concession to make sure they would accept his proposal. And it didn't work. So essentially, Macron, too, is in much more dire straits than Macron 1, because already he seems like a lame duck, and he really needs to re-engage the unions, re-engage political parties, because if not, he risks being seen as aloof and to alienate a lot of French people, not only those who are on the streets, but those who, according to the polls, oppose this reform and oppose the way Emmanuel Macron tried to impose it in Parliament.